Hello, everyone. Welcome to Module 3. To begin in Module 3, we're going to be talking about Mesoamerican societies. And of course, in an introductory course, we don't have a lot of time to talk about the incredible amount of pluralism and diversity that exists in Mesoamerica, at least in the religious context. So we're going to have to boil it down to what are the generalized things that produce worldviews in Mesoamerica, not only in the times of the pre-conquest before Europeans actually arrived, but what happens, what did those folks retain with them, which can be seen today. Now, when we talk about, religion in Mesoamerica, I think one sort of thing we have to think about is the idea of religion is a product of becoming stratified and hierarchical. What makes Mesoamerica very distinct is our early move towards agriculture, which started as early as 8000 BC. And that move towards agriculture led to sedentary lives. And it also led to new technologies which allowed Mesoamericans to store foods and to build surplus. And when individuals can control more surplus, they have more wealth, and that creates stratification and sort of a class-based society. So the sort of religions in which they're producing come from becoming completely stratified and hierarchical. Now, what's really interesting is the sort of monotheistic religions which we're used to around us also are products of becoming stratified and hierarchical. We got to figure out where and why we see the difference, right? And what is that difference, right? Well, why Mesoamericans have produced sort of the religious sort of structures which they have, particularly in the pre-conquest years, deals with a particular term. And this is the one we have to start out with, and it's called Cosmovision, right? And this is very distinct from a European framework. Now, Europeans began, early on in the Christian era, and even in the whole Judeo and even this Islamic sort of framework with, a sense of cosmovision, which was interrupted and turned in a different direction. But let's see what happens when this idea of cosmovision is taken to full tilt, often to one direction, and what sort of psychology does it produce. Okay, so a definition, cosmovision. All right, so very simply, it's sort of a particular way of understanding the world with regards to time and space, and with an understanding that time and space is a product of ritualization. In other words, human actions in the world in a ritualized context, which is driven by mythologies, keep the cosmos working and moving. What I mean by that, let's think about how our world works every day and the sort of regularities in which we depend upon. Could you imagine if the sun didn't rise one day, if it just ceased to come up? That's one regularity in which we depend upon. Right? And think about the tides in which we have in the ocean. Those are dependent upon the cycles of the moon, which happen absolutely regularly. There's no doubt that I can sit there with my watch and not, record the moon going around the earth, and it'll come up and come down exactly at the same time. I can watch how the tides move with absolute regularity. Well, this is the particular thing about Mesoamericans, that they were highly observant. As they began to build their societies and base them in agriculture and become stratified, they developed classes of people who were independent of having to work, the priestly classes. It's just their priestly classes were pretty good astronomers, right? Pretty good at looking at patterns, sort of pre-scientific way of looking. And they began to understand the patterns of everything they're looking at, the regularities. And they began to question, why are we seeing these regularities around them? And they also noticed something else. It's not just the patterns which we see, of course, dust to outer space. It's how they link to real events on this world, right? Seasons, right? How the sun being a certain distance from the earth waning, or the moon and the planets, how do they affect the crops in which you're growing, right? Temperature, rainfall, all of this seemed to the early Mesoamericans to be inextricably linked together. That these regularities are driving regularities on Earth. The issues is that the Earth wasn't always regular. That some periods they would see drought, yet they would see regularities in the sky, which were supposed to be regularities on Earth. Why the discord? Why the interruption? Why the famine? Why the starvation? And this is where the mythological views begin to come in, right? That humans must not be doing something right to help drive the cycles, which inadvertently affect the cycles of things like life on Earth, such as the crops and the weather and health and disease. So mythologies come about to explain how the gods are building the cosmos and their dramas are driving it. And it's humans who must reenact these dramas to remind the gods of their duties. And it's tough for the gods. They have to redo this again. So humans have to do something. Do ritual right and sacrifice. Right? Show the gods that we need this. Keep that regularity linked to the regularities on Earth. And we will give you these offerings. Thus, cosmovision is a real adjective. It means doing things ritually. To provoke the gods, to reward the gods for doing things they're supposed to do, which is linking the regularities of the cosmos above to the regularities which should be linked together on Earth to keep the world moving. Now, there's a layer on top of this that the Mesoamericans were also aware of the universe being in longer cycles. And what's sort of interesting is that scientists know the universe works in longer cycles. Even our weather works on longer cycles. And the orbit around the Earth is the orbit around the sun is constantly changing with the Earth. Our axial tilt changes back and forth, right? Even the wobble changes, and even the sort of shape of the orbit, sort of changes in recognizable sort of patterns. Now, for the Mesoamericans, they realized that there are short patterns like the sun coming up every day and the moon cycles and maybe the planets, but there were much bigger cycles. And those bigger cycles needed to be driven too. Literally whole worlds would emerge and go under, whole worlds would come up in larger time frames, sometimes in thousands of years, sometimes in hundreds of years. So the ritual calendars on which Mesoamericans established were to get things done on a daily basis. These micro sort of things, these ritualizations to get the gods to do something. Sometimes they were sort of, sub-macro, maybe on the annual sort of basis. Rituals that were done annually. And then rituals that were done, over longer periods of time to remind the gods and appease the gods to keep the longer cycles of the cosmos moving and the Earth, the different worlds. So the calendars in which they produce, and we always hear about Maya calendars, were really ritual calendars about how to do things and what should be done to appease the gods, to keep the mythological plays in the universe going, to keep the world moving and going. So we're going to be looking a little bit into that in this section. All right. So besides cosmovision, there's a few things that I think we should know about Mesoamerica. And while it is an incredibly complex sort of place, we sort of have to think about, how it was structured, right? So I talked about this idea about a vision of the world, but that vision was also a very highly structured vision. And generally, when we talk about cosmovision, we're talking about, 3 levels of hierarchy around us. There's the world that we live in, right? There's the underworld below, and then there's the world in which the heavens. Right? And there are 3 different levels, and we're in that sort of middle space, that's betwixt in between. It's the real plane in which we're living on, but it's also interlinked into a spiritual plane. And the worlds from below and the worlds from above are connected. See, they're not just independent, they're connected together, but they're connected through the central world in which we live in by 5 cosmic trees. Right, 5 cosmic spiritual trees in which allow the gods to move up and down in their spiritual plays. Which, when we're talking about driving a cosmos, it's not just the world above and the world here. It's also the world below, and it's all integrated together. All right, so that in a nutshell is what we're talking about when we're talking about ritual and religious activities in Mesoamerica. All right, so what I'm going to do is the first thing for you. I'm going to put up a little bit of a PowerPoint. I'm not going to put any annotations or words with it. I want you just to read through. I've kind of given you a brief description of what cosmovision is and sort of the structure of the sort of the universe, the sort of common, or the world that's common to most Mesoamerican societies. In the small little PDF PowerPoint slides I've got here for you, we'll show you what was around, what civilizations were there, sort of the extent of what Mesoamerica, was and is today. As some of the major civilizations that were there, and how we sort of classify those by actual periods. All right. Now, to help you with this and assist you with this sort of idea of cosmovision, we're going to see how cosmovision acts in the contemporary Mesoamerican people. What you're going to be seeing isn't just something out of the past, but something exists in the psychological space of the people today. So the first thing I want you to do is read the paper, which is right below this video I'm giving you. And it's called The Guidelines for the Study of Mesoamerican Religious Traditions by Alfredo Lopez Austin. A nice short paper which reiterates and expands on everything I've just discussed. And I love Alfredo Lopez's treatment of this to give you a really good sort of overall impression of who Mesoamericans really are. And how pervading this idea of cosmovision is, and how it binds Mesoamericans together in a commonality, right? So when someone says, "I'm from Mesoamerica," I can understand you. I understand where the mental template is. So to assist to seeing how that mental template is put in place in these folks, we're going to be looking at a video, and it's called "Out of the Past: The Spirit World." And this is episode number 7, and that video should be posted below. A fascinating look at how the old world carries forth and keeps people together. I don't know if people realize how horrible the conquest was. The Spanish conquest was really world destroying for these people, and by all rights they should have disintegrated. But something held them together. That spirit world will tell you exactly how that cosmovision integrated those folks together and how powerful this is. Right. And the last thing we're going to look at sort of extends beyond the world of Mesoamerica. We're going to be looking in Peru. The Peruvian highlands and most of the Andean highlands have a lot of commonality of what was actually happening in the upper Mesoamerican regions. They are products of the religion's a product of stratified hierarchical societies, which were based on agriculture and a lot of sky watching. This idea of cosmovision by priestly class watching the regular skies, producing mythologies and structuring religion or structuring societies by, mythological, ritualized, dramatic performances, which were world-making, world-maintaining events. It's the same thing that we're going to see, with the Andean societies, and particularly the Incas. Now, I don't want to delve into the ancient Incas. This is too much of history, but I do want to look at the aftermath. And I think the aftermath will be clearly present in this particular paper, which I want you to read, and it's by Michael Hill. Myth, and Globalization in New Age Andean Society. We're looking at a religious group, called the Intac Turincuna, and they're called the Children of the Sun, and they're in Peru. And they are a group they're not a sect, and that's the thing about when we talk about what religion is. There's no such thing as a cult or a sect. It's the same thing we're talking about, like what's the difference between a language and a dialect. A language is a dialect with an army and a navy. So when we talk about this group, they're just a smaller group which are emerging. A group which is trying to blend, syncretize, old myths with new myth structures, for the purpose of pulling their people back together to a central sort of point, reframing all the pluralization and hurt that is happening since the conquest. All the racism, which is becoming really problematic because of the conquest. How is it that people are trying to reintegrate myths? And not just old myths, but new myths, to sort of bind themselves together as a single people, right? And overcome the hurt of the past. And that's really what this paper is actually about. So the processes in which you're going to be reading in this paper are, into some effect, happening today throughout the entirety of the upper Mesoamerican societies, all right? So those are the things we want to accomplish and sort of get through in this particular assignment. And then on the next assignment, which we're going to be looking at, we'll be talking about something very, very different. We're going to be going back into monsters sort of subtly and a different sort of limelight. We're going to put them into the sort of framing of wild men and see what the difference is between wild men and monsters and how they actually function psychologically. All right, so again, yeah, get to work on this. If you have any questions about it, welcome to hit me up. I love when you guys actually call me because I love discussing these papers. I know them really well. I'm really excited about them, even in the films too, or again, by even by text or emails fine also. All right, guys, bye.